Hello, this is Scream from Milledgeville, Georgia. I'm Caleb Melvin, and I'm here with
Riley Greer, and we're your hosts. Today we're going to be discussing Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, Georgia.
Milledgeville, the former capital of Georgia, is a small but charming town near Lake Sinclair. It hosts both Georgia College and State University and Georgia Military College, as well as being the former home of Flannery O'Connor.
In contrast to all the lighter things that Milledgeville is home to, it also hosts the state's largest hospital for mental illness, Central State Hospital.
At one point, it had over 2,000 acres, which housed 13,000 patients. In its prime, it was a sensation. However, due to a combination of reasons, such as underfunding and unsupervised activity, it turned into an abandoned eerie cage that serves as a reminder of what went on behind the closed doors. Some say they can still hear the screams of the patients within the walls. To prepare for this podcast, I went out into the field to record audio from the site of the hospital. Here is that audio. In this audio, you can't hear much, other than leaves rustling in the wind and a few dogs barking in the background, as well as the occasional passing car. But while I was there, I had a very eerie feeling. Multiple times I thought I heard footsteps outside of my car, and at one point I could have sworn I heard somebody knock on the back of my window.
When you do listen to the audio, you can hear the leaves rustling through the trees, and I can confirm it is a very eerie feeling. You can hear also the wind that brushes past the mic, and I would not want to be there. I'm not sure why you went at 12:30 at night.
Keep in mind, I was there alone. No one else in the group could help me, so I was just there alone in the middle of the night. It was a pretty terrifying experience, if I do say so.
So, even though we didn't get much from the audio, would you still say that being there in person, that the audio really shaped your experience and gave you that eerie feeling?
It definitely did. I mean, at first when I was driving up to the campus, I was alone in the car, so I'd been playing music, but once I got there, I just kind of turned everything off and just had the windows down and was just driving around the campus, and it was definitely a very just strange feeling, because at some points there was just a disturbing silence almost, other than just the sound of my engine.
But I guess that really prepares you for how not weird, but eerie or creepy that the sound actually is on the grounds.
Yeah, because, I mean, there were definitely some things I heard that, like, I thought I heard footsteps.
That didn't come through in the mic?
I heard something, and I went to the point where I knew the sound should have been. It wasn't like the wind made some sound that sounded like a footstep. It was just like, I heard it, but it just didn't happen. Which is,
That surely sounds like a ghost to me. So right now we're here with Shirley Clayton, who was a student at UGA in the spring of '85. She was actually working and doing a study at Central State, and we're going to ask her a couple questions. So, Miss Clayton, why were you working at Central State Hospital?
So back then, UGA required all social work majors to do an internship at Central State Hospital. There were about 20 to 25 of us, as I recall, that were all seniors.
And how long were you assigned to be there?
We were assigned to go down from Athens from about March until June, and we were on the quarter system back then, so it was spring quarter. It was strange having to spend your last quarter at college at a mental institution, especially one as old and storied as Central State.
Aren't all colleges mental institutions?
Honestly, yeah, they really are.
what were you and your classmates assigned to do?
So we were each given like a location assignment that we would work at for the quarter. I had probably the best one because I was assigned to the Georgia War Veterans Home. It's actually still there today on the old campus and is still active. Some of my classmates had much harder assignments. One, for example, had a schizophrenia case, one had a mental retardation case, and some were like long-term mental illnesses that had been there for decades. They had a really difficult time because it was simply going from class learning to real-life application.
Did you at least enjoy the work you did? I mean, how did you feel about it?
As I said, my assignment was much easier. I really enjoyed the work, and I spent most of my time talking to the World War II veterans, which was honestly really fascinating to learn about. My assignment was not as difficult and heavy-hearted as my peers' assignments were. However, working on the general property gave me a really strange feeling most of the time.
What were the living quarters like?
The living quarters we had were really, really outdated and old. I think we were in the old Powell building, which was one of the original structures and really didn't seem safe at all.
So what did it look like on the inside?
The paint was peeling, the windows were broken, there was rusty metal everywhere, and there was just a horrid smell all the time. And because it used to be one of the old hospital residences, it just felt like a horror movie all the time, and none of us liked living there. We were all alone too, because we were isolated in that building at night just to be away from the patients for a little bit.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clayton, for taking your time to do an interview with us. It's really fascinating to hear about your experiences in the old Central State Hospital.
And it was my pleasure. I love talking about it. Thank you for having me.
Central State actually has a dark and twisted history.
So the hospital was primarily a place for mentally ill people to go for treatment, but it wasn't exclusively for that. Instead, it kind of became a place that families would just go to dump people they didn't really want. It ranged from things like relatives who were alcoholics. They would send people there who were in interracial relationships. Since divorce was really frowned upon back then, sometimes guys would just be like, yo, she's crazy, and then send her to the hospital. So that's not very good. So even the people who weren't mentally ill, they would treat them. They would do electric shock therapy, which doctors termed Georgia Power cocktail. They would also do some lobotomies, and then insulin and sterilization.
So that was a really big thing in the Reformation period of the United States history, was sending people who weren't actually mentally ill to these kinds of hospitals.
Yeah.
And families, fathers and uncles would use this often as a threat to make women behave, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself. Let's go back to the electric shock therapy. What the doctors termed as you said earlier, the Georgia Power cocktail. It took place every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and before shock treatments, doctors at Central State routinely performed lobotomies, removing part of the patient's brain to alter their behavior.
Yeah, adding to the hospital's bill of atrocities, eugenics. In 1937, Georgia enacted a eugenics law, along with around 32 other states. The eugenics law in the state stopped people the state deemed unfit to reproduce from reproducing. It was widely accepted and encouraged for as long as it was running, although the doctors did advocate that a patient could appeal the ruling. Rarely were the patients ever informed of the right, so usually appeals didn't actually happen. Between 1937 and 63, around 3,300 Georgians were sterilized. So another treatment that the hospital often did is they would just give patients insulin. An insulin overdose became the new treatment for manic and depressive patients. Insulin overdoses would induce comas, and not surprisingly, the treatment would work about half the time. Manic depressive patients usually were sleep deprived. The coma relieved some of the stress on the body, allowing them to return to normal. About half of the patients who received this treatment reported an improved or restored disposition, but it also caused a lot of problems, and only 50% is a pretty bad statistic.
I mean, even the doctor credibility was strange. Nurses performed surgeries without supervision. A physician moonlighting for a pharmaceutical company used experimental drugs on patients without their consent. Patients were left unattended for long periods of time. Fewer than 48 doctors were responsible for the 13,000 patients. There wasn't even a psychiatrist on the staff, and of the physicians, about a fourth had a history of drug or alcohol abuse. Even some of the staff was hired directly off the hospital wards after receiving treatment themselves. The state of the hospital was overrun and in poor condition. Patients were forced to sleep in long rows of cots that were side by side. A photo from the 1940s actually shows men in suits staring at a little 5 or 6-year-old boy locked inside a metal cage. There are some pretty freaky stories surrounding Central State. Just to show how ineffective the treatment provided at Central State was, the first of the 50 patients, 29 died without ever leaving. The causes of death are listed as dysentery, chronic diarrhea, convulsions, and general paralysis. Only 8 of the first 50 were pronounced cured. On the grounds, an estimation of 2,000 cast iron markers commemorates this 25,000 to 30,000 patients buried at the hospital. The state penitentiary prisoners would actually come and mow the grass and mow the lawn. It's rumored that they picked them up and tossed them into the woods, these cast iron markers, just to make mowing easier.
So another urban legend around the hospital started because of this guy. Peter Cranford, a psychologist at the hospital, wrote in his journal, 3 patients died nearby after escaping. Another hanged himself with a bedsheet. 1 patient beat another to death. When a patient in the maximum security unit vomited on the floor, 2 employees ordered him to clean up the mess with a towel and then forced him to eat the towel. The patient choked to death. Most of the times when I hear about urban legends, I always kind of have this level of separation to them where I'm like, oh, that's a spooky story, but
you never actually believe
didn't happen.
them.
But now there's actual historical evidence, and a lot of these things that in some other places would just be super far-fetched urban legends, they genuinely happen.
When it becomes real, we see how disturbing we can actually be, and how far the line from decent human behavior to atrocity, and how thin that line really is. So that begs the question, who were the actually mentally ill people in these hospitals? Was it the patients, or was it the people running it? Today we've talked about the history of Milledgeville and Central State Hospital. We talked about the sounds and ambiance that happens at the hospital and some spooky stories to go along with it. We discussed treatment methods and the dark, sinister things that happened in Central State and what it looks like today.
This is Scream, signing off.